Welcome back to the State of Play. So what are the big takeouts then from that conversation with Minister Ayanda Dlodlo? What's the state of play in our intelligence services and national security? Let's get then into the middle game with former head of foreign intelligence, Shaik, and Murray Hunter from C1rcle Up. He joins us from our Cape Town studios. All right, straight into the conversation then. Shaik, thank you so much for coming through. So you were listening to that interview by Minister Ayanda Dlodlo. We know the state of the State Security Agency and other agencies as per the report of the high-level review panel. What did you make of the response to that? Where do we sit right now as South Africans in as far as national security is concerned and the ability to respond to threats?
I think the Minister is grappling with the right issues. But I would go a little further and say that I think our intelligence services is in what I would call a pre-existential crisis phase. And given many of the issues she raises, there has to be clearly defined mandates in respect of what are the threats we are facing. How do you deal with some of these threats? Many of the threats have both in the world we live in today, have a law enforcement agency issue, so we need to start thinking about whether we start to think about a national law enforcement capacity, very similar to what was originally thought of in terms of whether we have the South African version of an FBI to ensure prosecution, intelligence-led prosecutions. And of course, the other issues that you raised, the cybersecurity issues, well, there's the threat to cybersecurity, but there's also a range of ethical issues that I'm sure Murray is going to talk about.
Yeah. Murray in Cape Town joining us there. Talk to me about the whole issue around politicization of the intelligence agencies. That's a big one, isn't it? The minister says she has not had to purge people. She believes she can rehabilitate people who were involved in the factions in the ANC. Can she?
Sure. I think that there's a bigger question to be asked, which is we are a year into a very, very ambitious project, supposedly, to reform and rebuild the State Security Agency from what appears to have been a period of massive factionalism and organizational dysfunction and criminality. That's not my word. Those are really things that are coming out of the President's own inquiry into state security. I think that the bigger question is, why are we not further into that process? Why is there so little to show from that process? So, for example, rehabilitating people who've been part of factionalism, I didn't see that in the list of recommendations that came out of a panel of experts urging the President, urging the Minister to take very bold action to try to rescue this, rescue this institution. There was actually, that report recommended possible criminal investigation of a number of those individuals who were involved in factionalism and involved in abusing their positions of power. And I think that a conciliatory approach, if that's the way the minister has wanted to go, that's fine, but we don't really have any evidence of any kind of approach and any positive results out of that approach.
Mo, you were inside in the State Security Agency. Can some of these agent comrades be rehabilitated as the minister is hoping?
Sure. I think, it's a simple matter of enforcing a code of conduct, what should be done and what should not be done, and there should be consequent management when there are violations. And I think that's one of the things that the agency has perhaps not been good at, and perhaps the whole of government has not been good at. Where there are violations, there should be consequence management. And you see that when consequence management gets politicized, and then in the changes that take place in government, wrongdoing becomes a culture and becomes perpetuated. So I think, yes, wrongdoing with consequence management can produce a culture that if you do something wrong, you would, in fact...
Yeah, because she's talking about these are people with experience, whose experience we need.
Yes.
Is there even a debate about that balancing act between their experience and the wrongdoing? Because being involved in politics is actually not something that people who are responsible for state security should be doing.
Yes, in my view, and the Constitution is quite clear on that, that we should not be politically partisan and we should not favor or prejudice the rights of political parties, and I think consideration should be given to that. But I think there's a bigger problem, and the bigger problem is that we come from a particular history, a particular background, and the type of people that were recruited into our state agencies, by and large, came from political backgrounds of the ANC, the previous government, etc. But what we require today may be a very different kind of intelligence officer. And that's the attention the minister should be.
Murray, quickly, on the issue of surveillance, right, and the whole, maybe you can even tie it in with the Protection of State Information Bill. But firstly, surveillance. Did you hear there where the minister almost tacitly agrees that she actually did instruct for a civilian's cell phone to be tapped without a warrant from a judge, and basically justifies it by saying that people were going to die had she not done that? How does that sit with you?
I think there's a very, very problematic history of surveillance powers of this state being abused. And the people who sit in those positions have often said it's for the greater good. I think one of the very worrying signs that this is a state security agency that has not learned the lessons of the very recent past and has not followed the roadmap that has been set out for it in the last year, is that the state security agency is actually appealing. The C1rcle law, the surveillance law, has recently been ruled unconstitutional on a number of grounds, specifically because of a pattern of evidence that's been built up that those spying powers have been used against investigative journalists, against perceived political rivals within the agencies, against whistleblowers. And a court has ruled parts of that law to be unconstitutional. That very same law has been used, invoked by the minister now to justify her actions. And unfortunately, we've recently seen news that the State Security Agency, where it has appealed every aspect of that judgment, really indicating that they haven't taken on board the lesson that surveillance abuses have been at the center of what has created, unfortunately, this dysfunction at the State Security Agency, and is also at the center of the sort of the broader malaise, the state capture malaise that we've seen across the country.
Murray Hunter, thank you so much for coming through and joining me. Shaik, thank you, but I can't let you go without asking you about the DA. The DA says they are not impressed at all with Minister Lindiwe Sisulu appointing you as a special advisor. What gives? They're saying that you are someone who's qualified in optometry. What do you know about water?
Yeah. I read that missive by the DA. I must say that it's the first time I heard that optometry is not a qualification in sight. I thought optometry is always a qualification in vision and sight, but I think they misunderstood a whole range of things. I've been appointed on a committee to deal with the stabilization of the department, and I have a particular role to play on it, which comes essentially from my experience at the Development Bank of Southern Africa and infrastructure financing, and I thought the DA was being rather unkind about not noting that experience.
All right, Shaik, thank you so much for coming through.
But I can't go
to the state
before I make my move. So here is your night. Go on.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Shaik, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
One of our very first few guests here on The State of Play. Coming up, I give you my take on the moves around the Minister of Public Enterprises. That's Pravin Gordhan.